I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
We'll be there.
This is GB News.
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Mark Dolan tonight on another historic day for America and the world. Just a week after the attempted assassination of presidential hopeful Donald Trump, dramatic video footage of which we brought you on this show, the current incumbent of the White House, President Joe Biden, about whom there have been profound health concerns for a long period of time now, has sensationally pulled out of the presidential race in November. So tonight we're asking, who replaces him? Is this a political gift for Donald Trump? Does it guarantee Trump the keys to the White House this autumn? Or, if the Democrats can find the right candidate, is this a political banana skin which keeps the orange one out of office for the next 4 years? Tonight, we're going to speak to Republican Party insiders, Democrats. I've got a close friend of Joe Biden joining me in just a couple of minutes, and political commentators on both sides of the pond. And I want to hear your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. Have we been lied to about the state of Joe Biden's cognitive health over the last 4 years? Now, let me tell you that we've completely torn up the running order for the show tonight. We were going to talk about the Labour Party and the economy and Suella Braverman. Who's that? All eyes tonight are on the US, and I'll bring you every twist and turn. It promises to be an evening of high political drama. And as long as it's within my power, you will always get a Take It 10 monologue. And tonight, my hot-off-the-press verdict on Joe Biden's 4 years in office. An embarrassing and catastrophic chapter in American history, hopefully never to be repeated. So, Biden's out, but who's in? Find out after the news headlines with someone that is still running in November, Tatiana Sanchez.
Mark, thank you very much. The top stories as our President Joe Biden has announced he is standing down from the US presidential race, saying it's in the interests of his party and the country. It comes 4 months before Americans go to the polls, pending the race for the White House. He posted a statement on X this evening saying it has been the greatest honour of my life to serve as president. It follows weeks of intense pressure from fellow Democrats after a faltering debate performance against Republican Donald Trump at the end of June. Biden will continue as president for the remainder of his term. He's backed his Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place as the Democratic Party's nominee. Spokeswoman for Republicans Overseas UK, Sarah Elliott, said the election race will be a divisive one.
This is also another reason why Joe Biden didn't step down earlier, because Kamala Harris was not a very popular alternative to him. So it will be a fascinating but very divisive election campaign going forward. But they're going to have to switch gears. Trump right now is leading in all the swing states, almost beyond the margin of error. But those polls mean nothing now because it's a new person at the head of the ticket.
Meanwhile, former US President Donald Trump, who is standing for the Republican Party, has responded to the news. Writing on his Truth Social platform, President Trump said Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve and never was. He also said, "We will suffer greatly because of his presidency, but we will remedy the damage he has done very quickly." Here in the UK, the Prime Minister has paid tribute to President Joe Biden, saying he will have made his decision to withdraw based on what he believes is in the best interests of the American people. Tory leader Rishi Sunak praised Joe Biden's love for America and dedication to service. The former Prime Minister said, "Our partnership has led to significant achievements and I wish him all the best." Meanwhile, in other news today, Rachel Reeves has suggested that pay rises could be on the way for public sector workers. Independent review bodies are reportedly set to recommend pay rises of 5.5% for teachers and NHS staff. But schools and hospitals are unlikely to be able to meet the above-inflation boost with their existing budgets. The Chancellor says a final decision will be made soon and insists the sums in her budget will add up. And normal levels of service at GP surgeries will take some time to come back after Friday's global IT outage. The British Medical Association warned GPs need time to catch up on lost work over the weekend after the tech glitch knocked a computer system used by doctors offline. The outage was caused by a faulty security update that was deployed to around 8.5 million Windows devices. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Tatiana. You join us on a truly historic day for America and for the world as President Joe Biden, the current incumbent of the White House, pulls out of the race in November. There will be a new opponent for Donald Trump. Who's it going to be? You'll get capacious coverage of this story over the next 2 hours. We'll be heading to the United States in just a moment, but first in the studio is GB News' national reporter, Charlie Peters. Charlie, you've been watching this story for weeks now. This decision was anticipated. Why is it dropped today?
Well, that's the question that needs to be answered, because this morning on MSNBC, Biden's campaign manager actually flatly rejected claims that he was going to drop out later, as he did at 1:45 this afternoon, shocking members of his team, his close team, that have reportedly bunkered down to surround President Biden with good news, reportedly keeping away the negative polling that was making it so obvious to so many in the Democratic Party that Joe Biden had to go. Now, it's understood that Nancy Pelosi and the former President Barack Obama were leading this charge within the Democratic Party to pressure Biden to step aside, and a core part of that plan has been getting him to see the data they are seeing. That since that so-called disastrous debate performance at the end of last month, his ratings have fallen apart, in particular in the swing states, Pennsylvania, etc., where he really needs to win in November if he's to have any chance against Trump. But as this decision has now been made, and he's made this coronation call for Kamala Harris to replace him, there's not signs at the moment that all is going to be clean for Kamala Harris, because former President Barack Obama, in the last 10 minutes or so, has issued a statement praising Biden's decision to step down, reaffirming that he's one of the most consequential presidents in American history, but he's yet to explicitly states that Kamala Harris is who he wants to be the next selection from the Democratic side. He says he has every confidence in the party to choose the right leader.
Yeah.
That's not what Biden wants.
Perhaps that's code for anyone but Kamala Harris, because the vice president is not a strong candidate. She's got negative poll ratings. She's nearly as unpopular as Joe Biden.
Yeah, and that's a point that Donald Trump was trying to force to his supporters yesterday. His first rally since that attempted assassination on the previous weekend. He actually asked a poll from his audience by virtue of cheers and reactions. He said, who would you like me to run against? Kamala Harris, or as he always calls him, Crooked Joe. And the audience cheered significantly more loudly for Joe Biden. They've always seen him, particularly on the Republican side, as the weak candidate. And it was interesting to see that from his supporters, his base, his keenest supporters, those who come to his rallies, that actually on Kamala Harris, they were pretty nervous.
Most definitely. Now, clearly, Kamala Harris is a debatable candidate in terms of her qualities. You might consider her to be an asset to the Trump campaign. But the departure of Joe Biden from the race, it is a headache for Donald Trump, isn't it? Because he's now entered the realms of the unknown. He doesn't know who he's facing or how good they might be.
2 hours ago, he looked almost certain to become the next president of the United States, to return again as President 45 re-enshrined. But that whole path has now been thrown into some uncertainty with this move, especially so late before the convention. An open primary seems unlikely. Kamala Harris, his supporters think that Kamala Harris will be more of a difficult challenger. I think President Donald Trump probably thinks the same.
Well, I'm delighted to say that Charlie Peters is with us all evening. But joining me now live from the United States is GB News' US correspondent, Stephen Edgington. Stephen, how is this news being received stateside?
I think that not many people are too shocked by this. The debate performance that Biden had was so disastrous for him that people expected him to drop out fairly soon. And I think the Democrats, they face a big issue now. Who do they replace Biden with? As Charlie said, Obama hasn't endorsed Kamala Harris, but Biden has. It seems that she has a significant advantage heading into the convention next month. And interestingly enough, the Democrats, they have pulled out their candidates before, just before general elections. I think the last time it happened was in 1968 when Lyndon Johnson dropped out, and they were defeated in a landslide by Richard Nixon. So I think whatever happens, this does not look good for the Democratic Party. They've really been thrown into chaos today.
How do the Trump campaign respond to this? Because it is a curveball, isn't it?
I think, well, what Trump has already said is that Harris is a very weak candidate. And I think the Republicans see Kamala Harris as unlikable. She doesn't poll very well against Donald Trump. So I think that they have to basically react by deciding who their main target is. Is it Kamala Harris? Is it Michelle Obama, potentially another candidate for the Democrats? Is it Gavin Newsom? And I think that what we've seen so far is that Trump is really going after Harris. They see her as being the most likely nominee. Also, they're saying, why is Biden remaining as president when he's saying he's, not fit enough to be the candidate? He could be president, or he probably will be president for the next 5 months, all things being equal. And they're simply making the point that if he's not good enough to be the candidate for the presidency, why is he well enough or fit enough to be the president of the United States for another 5 months?
Most definitely. Do you think there's a chance that Biden will be forced to step down as president of the United States in the weeks ahead, given the fact that he has today and tonight just yielded to pressure to exit the campaign?
Anything's possible, and I think that the Democrats have really put a lot of pressure onto Biden to drop out. The only people around Biden who are trying to keep him in the race seem to be his wife and a few other close aides. But people like Barack Obama behind the scenes have really been putting pressure onto President Biden so that he's not the nominee. It looked like the Democrats are obviously desperate to beat Donald Trump, and they saw Biden as being an obstacle from that ultimate goal. So I think that Biden, he could come under a lot of pressure. Already Republicans like the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, are calling for him to resign as the president. And if you start seeing that kind of pressure on the Democratic side as well, it might become overwhelming. And the logic of this argument, as I say, is quite strong. If you can't be the candidate, why are you fit enough to be the president now?
Most definitely, it looks like America is in the throes of a constitutional crisis. My thanks to Stephen Edgington, who returns shortly. He is GB News' US correspondent. I think we're able now to go over to a former senior advisor to Donald Trump when he was in the White House, a good friend of Trump's as well, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, a political commentator and broadcaster. Seb Gorka, this is your worst nightmare. The Trump team have lost their greatest asset, Joe Biden.
Great to hear from you. No, it's the worst nightmare ever for the Democrats. I mean, let's look at the statistics of it all. This woman, this disaster whose only qualification was having a vagina and the right skin color, this woman in the Democrat primaries, I'm not talking about an election, in the Democrat primaries garnered
Sebastian, let me interrupt you. Sebastian, let me interrupt you. That's pretty unkind language about the Vice President. This is an accomplished lawyer and senior politician, and the Vice President of your country. Do you wish to take back that rather sexist remark?
No, I don't. It's a statement of fact. She is the DEI hire. She's the diversity, equity, inclusion hire. Ask Willie Brown. Ask Mayor Willie Brown how she got her first job, okay? Just Google Willie Brown and Kamala Harris and talk to me about her qualifications. I take nothing back.
Seb Gorka, she has reached the top of politics and she may well be the next president of the United States. But yes, how are the Trump camp responding to this story?
Let me finish before you interrupted me twice because of what they said in your ear. This is a woman who garnered less than 3% of the vote in the Democrat primary, not in a national election. Amongst only Democrats, she got less than 3% of the vote. So this is a great day for those who want to take back America from those who are trying to destroy it, which includes Biden and Kamala.
OK, and listen, how will the Trump campaign recalibrate now in the absence of Joe Biden?
No need to recalibrate, because if Kamala is the nominee, she was there. As you say, she was the right hand of the disastrous senile old man who's now leaving the race. Therefore, the disasters of the last 3.5 years can be pinned onto both Biden and Kamala. The inflation, the economy, the world wars, the 20 million illegals, all of that is her responsibility as well. And whoever they pick, if they try to do an end run around her, which will be impossible with a white, straight guy, whoever they pick, it's irrelevant, because nobody's disagreed. Nobody's disagreed in the Democrat Party, or nobody of any consequence, with what Biden has done for the last 3.5 years. So, it is on them. The culpability is theirs. Whoever they pick, President Trump will have the same counter message.
Seb Gorka, as you well know, the Democratic Party are a self-preservation machine. They are ruthless about staying in power for as long as possible. Yeah. No man or woman is bigger than the party. Do you think they'll try to find a stronger candidate than Kamala Harris to face Donald Trump?
Well, I think that's a desperate move. I mean, look at what the reports we're getting today from left-wing sources. This morning, Biden's campaign manager said he's not leaving. And now we have confirmation that the White House staffers found out about his stepping down from the tweet. I mean, that is a dysfunctional entity, if ever I heard one. So what are they going to do? How do they jump over the black female vice president? It's nigh on impossible. Who else can they choose? So I'm just going to sit back and buy shares in popcorn for the next 99 days.
How will your friend Donald Trump be feeling this evening after a tumultuous 8 days?
Well, if you go online, if you go to my Twitter feed, my Instagram feed, you'll see a reposted after the disastrous debate, the Biden debate, where he stood there for 90 minutes with his mouth open. President Trump went golfing right afterwards, and some unscrupulous individual surreptitiously filmed him when he asked him, so what do you think is going to happen? This is after the debate. This is like almost a month ago. My former boss said, yeah, they're going to throw him under the bus. Joe's going to drop out, and then it'll be Kamala. So the president knew this was going to happen, because he always predicts these things. So he is more ready than most, because he knew exactly what was going to happen after that cataclysmic debate performance from Joe Biden.
Seb Gorka, Joe Biden is a problem that hasn't really gone away because he may have withdrawn from the race in November, but he'll be president for the next few months. Yeah. That's a big problem for the Democrats, isn't it?
Well, not only that, it kind of is, besmirches all the principles they say they hold. So we knew that he was senile. We knew he had 2 brain aneurysms before he even became president. They told us for the last 3 years, if you say that Joe Biden is not compos mentis, you're a conspiracy theorist. And now he's dropped out. So how can he still be the commander-in-chief? And not only that, they've been saying, oh, Donald Trump being re-elected is a threat to democracy. Well, who's just taken a very large crap on democracy by saying we had a nomination process, 13 million Democrats chose Joe Biden, but we're just going to rip that up. Who cares about who you chose? That's the Democrats. They don't give a flying fig about democracy.
Seb Gorka, good to have you on the show, and we'll catch up soon. A former senior advisor to Donald Trump, of course, a popular broadcaster and political commentator, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Let's hear from tonight's top pundits right now. Political commentator Chloe Dobbs, former Labour parliamentary candidate and special advisor Paul Richards, and the former political editor of LBC, Theo Usherwood. Chloe Dobbs, let me start with you. Your reaction to the news that's broken tonight. Joe Biden out of the race for the White House.
I mean, I'm glad to see that he is finally gone. This has been a long time coming. I was genuinely shocked that after that horrific presidential debate that he didn't step down then. He's clung on, but now his time has come. Sadly, I don't think, though, that any of the alternative candidates are going to be any good. We're probably going to end up with Kamala Harris. There is the so-called Kamala Harris problem, which is that she is a woman of colour. It's very difficult to replace her unless they can convince, say, Michelle Obama to run. But I think given that Obama is being quite heavily involved, it sounds like in this decision-making process, we probably would have heard by now if Michelle Obama was up for it. So I think we're going to be stuck with her, I'm afraid.
Chloe Dobbs, I was personally very shocked by the remarks of Dr. Sebastian Gorka, his comments about Kamala Harris, Vice President, saying she's only in that job because of her skin colour and her possession of a vagina. What did you make of that language?
I mean, I probably wouldn't have used exactly the same words, to be honest, but he does have a point that being a woman of colour in this world where everything is about DEI definitely gives you a leg up. I mean, as he told you there, she only got 3% of the vote amongst the Democrats. She is very, very unpopular. She is often accused of using what we call word soup, in that she just spouts out words that don't mean anything. She flip-flops on policy. No one understands what she stands for. She's a very weak candidate. And how do you get to the position of vice president when you're that unpopular? I think that the colour of her skin and the fact that she's a woman probably has something to do with it.
Paul Richards, did Dr. Sebastian Gorka go too far in his remarks about Vice President Harris just now?
I thought they were pretty disgusting, actually. They were pretty morally reprehensible, and it probably sets the tone of how the Trump campaign want to run this election, is through invective and slurs and unpleasant language and being nasty about their opponents. And I mean, bring it on, because, you know, most decent people in America will look at that kind of politics and reject it.
Now, Paul Richards, the Labour Party have been very disciplined in their messaging in the last few months. It has led to an historic landslide victory on July the 4th. I've got to say, the Labour spin doctors have been working overtime. They've been very successful. The same can't be said for the US Democrats, can it?
Well, there's an argument going on inside the Democrats now about whether it should be a coronation or a contest. And there are various voices, people like James Carville have said, you know, there should be a proper contest. And I do wonder in the next few hours whether candidates and camps will start to emerge. And some of the briefing, I mean, it's early days, isn't it? But, you know, some of the briefing starts to suggest that there will be this. So I think, you know, it's always better to have a contest. It's always better for the candidate to have won off the back of a proper vote and people having their say. We found with Gordon Brown, didn't we, when he was coronated leader of the Labour Party, you know, it probably would have been better for him if he'd actually won a contest. So I think that's what's going to happen over the next few hours, if not days. And, of course, that means all the spin control goes out of the window because people are, you know, vying for position and trying to get the attention of different sections of the Democrat Party.
Now, Theo Usherwood, in a moment we're going to get a statement from Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, someone that may replace Joe Biden in the race for the White House. But can we look at Donald Trump for a moment? I'm not convinced by Dr. Sebastian Gorka's hubris there. This is a political banana skin for Donald Trump now, isn't it?
Well, Donald Trump just needs to stick to the successes that he's had in the last couple of weeks. Of course, Joe Biden effectively imploded his campaign when he had that disastrous election debate, which, of course, the Democrats had called early to try and set the tone of the debate running into November's election, but was unable to get his words out properly, formulate an argument against Donald Trump. And then Donald Trump very effectively, and we saw it from the moment that he lifted his fist up after that assassination attempt, managed to harness what had happened to his political advantage, use it to his political advantage so effectively from the moments immediately afterwards and then going into the Republican National Convention. And what the Democrats were really worried about when Donald Trump was speaking at that convention and for the first 15 minutes of his most recent rally was when he was moderate, when he was appealing to America to be a unifying candidate, Mr. America, the father of the nation. That's what scares the Democrats, because that's going after swing voters. It's going after undecideds who actually are looking at the contest and thinking that Donald Trump may just be okay, he may be palatable, and that they can vote for him. The banana skin comes. The mistakes will happen if Donald Trump decides to go down the route that Sebastian Gorka just went down there with being divisive, using that kind of misogynistic language, because that's what when voters look at it, middle of the road voters look at it, really puts them off. What really worries the Democrats, what scares the Democrats, is when Donald Trump plays to that image of him being, as I said, the father of the nation who took the bullet for democracy in that assassination attempt. That's what scares them.
OK, well, folks, a debate is raging about the comments of Dr. Seb Gorka, who said that Vice President Kamala Harris is only in that post because of her skin colour and her possession of a vagina. Now, Mark Dolan tonight is the home of diverse opinion. Dr. Sebastian Gorka is an experienced political commentator. He's entitled to his view, although I find the language deeply offensive. However, we've heard from Vice President Kamala Harris. Let's head over now to our national reporter, Charlie Peters, and she's made a statement on Twitter, which, of course, is how politicians communicate these days.
And it's also been issued via the Biden-Harris campaign, not the White House, so specifically from this campaigning perspective. And Kamala Harris says, I am honoured to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination.
Yikes.
She's added, I will do everything in my power to unite the Democratic Party.
Good luck with that.
And unite our nation to defeat Donald Trump and his extreme Project 2025 agenda. She adds, we have 107 days until Election Day. Together we will fight and together we will win. And as Kamala Harris has issued this statement, we're also hearing that in the last 2 hours since this announcement was made, more than $5 million has arrived in the Democratic Party's coffers for this campaign, for this upcoming election. That was one of the key concerns, of course, in the move to oust Joe Biden, was that donors had abandoned them, not just voters.
What chance of a procession for Kamala Harris? She is the vice president, therefore the natural default to replace Joe Biden, not just as president, if there was ill health or a death, but indeed as the person to run in November. Do you think that the party will want a conservative-style moment of self-reflection and a long campaign and hustings, a beauty contest?
Right.
Or is it a rubber stamp for Kamala Harris? What do you think?
Well, coronation is the strategy that the Democratic Party almost certainly wants here. We brought you news in the last hour that Barack Obama had issued his statement about Joe Biden standing down, one of the most consequential presidents in history, but not endorsing her. more fuel to that flame, because Gavin Newsom's team, he's the governor of California, widely tipped as the successor to Joe Biden. His team are understood to be sharing some polling in a memo demonstrating that he has a better chance than Kamala Harris of defeating Donald Trump.
And so do they move? Well, let me tell you, we are bringing out the big guns. In the studio in just a few minutes' time, one of the most experienced and respected journalists in the country, The Sun's Trevor Kavanagh. He's just announced his retirement after 6 decades in journalism. And, of course, he's an expert on politics on both sides of the pond. Trevor Kavanagh has the ear, of course, of Rupert Murdoch and has done for decades. He's with me for his reaction to this developing story in just a moment. But first, let's head back to the United States. And Ed Brodo, a political commentator and best-selling author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, America on Its Knees, The Cost of Replacing Trump with Biden. Ed Brodo, good to have you back on the show. Your reaction to this political bombshell?
Well, I'm very nervous about it because, and I agree with what Dr.
Seb Gorka
said, except I think instead of getting off on the rhetoric, let me put it in a different way. Harris is considered by most people in this country as a public fool. Nobody takes her seriously. When she opens her mouth, it's a disaster. She has never accomplished anything. And there are a lot of people like me who are scared to death of the possibility that she might wind up in the White House. It's a frightening thought.
Why is she such an unpopular figure?
Well, first of all, she has no qualifications. She is, in my opinion, a DEI person in there. You know, that's how she slipped in.
What do you mean by, for those that don't know, Ed Brodo, what does DEI mean and what are the implications of it?
Well, we have a big thing going on in this country about diversity. And for some reason, Biden seems to think that having a black woman is important. I think what's important is having someone who is qualified. And she is not qualified.
And is this a problem for Donald Trump? Because, of course, he was a shoo-in for the White House with an opponent like Joe Biden, who more or less collapsed in that last presidential TV debate. How do the Trump camp react to this news?
Well, you must remember that as a result of this assassination attempt, Trump is now a national hero. He has been elevated to a position that he never had before. He is in the strongest position that he's ever been in, and unless they come up with, you know, God as their nominee, I think Trump is a shoo-in.
Ed Brodo, thank you so much for joining us. We'll catch up soon. Ed Brodo is the author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, America on Its Knees, The Cost of Replacing Trump with Biden. With me in the studio is the former political editor and columnist at The Sun, Trevor Kavanagh. Trevor, we invited you in this evening to talk about your long career. You've just retired after 6 decades in journalism. What a massive story. Do you wish you were still there in the Sun newsroom reporting on this kind of thing?
Well, it does whet the taste buds a little, I have to say. I retired and I said that I was the same age as Joe Biden, and I thought it was about time that both of us left the building, and I'm very pleased to see that he's followed my advice. I think he's been a disaster as president, particularly in recent months, but probably from the outset, and a new disaster is about to loom in the shape of Kamala Harris if she takes his position. It just beggars belief that knowing that with a man as frail as he is and the age he is, that she was picked to be a heartbeat away from the presidency the moment she had the job. And as your last two correspondents, I think Seb Gorka, without the language, hit the nail on the head. She was a token politician because she certainly isn't a vice president. She isn't qualified for the job, and she certainly isn't qualified for the job as president of the United States and leader of the free world.
Indeed. Do you think that Joe Biden was ever fit enough to be president? I mean, he was a reasonably capable vice president under Barack Obama. That was a long time ago. But, I mean, do you think in 2020 it was the wrong choice on the part of the Democratic Party to put him forward?
I do. I think it was a desperate choice, and it was impossible for them, apparently, to find anyone else at that point to fill his boots, fill the boots. But this is a man, as one of your correspondents has already mentioned, who's had 2 brain aneurysms, which effectively weakens the chances of the brain permanently staying fit and active into later life. And he is now in later life, and the idea of him serving a second term as president in a very, very demanding role. I mean, the idea at my age that I would even go back to being political editor is beyond me. When he's making major decisions that affect the future of the free world, every few minutes of the working day, while at the same time occasionally taking a nap or a long weekend away from it, it is an astonishing situation that the United States has landed the Western democracies in.
Have the US media misled the American public and the world about the state of Joe Biden's cognitive health?
They've done it simply because of the hatred they've drummed up against Donald Trump. So almost anything is better than Donald Trump, and if necessary, you have to put a rod up his back and hold him in position, if necessary, to show that he's still functioning. But I think that that has bounced back against him very badly now. He is demonstrably incapable of holding that job, and has been for at least the last few months. I mean, the images of him at the G7 summit in Italy, with him turning and looking at an empty field, that was the beginning of the end, surely, long before the debate. But in any event, long before any of these events took place, he was clearly not up to
Well, I'll be tackling this in my Take at 10 at the top of the hour. It won't be nearly as good as any of your columns for The Sun, but I'll give it my best shot. And I'm going to suggest that he was very lucky in 2020 because we were mid-pandemic, and therefore the excuse for Joe Biden was he couldn't campaign because of the virus, because of COVID-19. He earned the nickname Basement Joe, and that was critical because the American public were not able to see just how decrepit this man actually was.
Yes, and as I say, if it weren't for the fact that the contempt for Donald Trump as a human being, let alone as a prospective president for a second term, if it weren't for that, the public, the press and the media generally would have been probing much more deeply into the qualifications of Joe Biden for this job. And I think that, in fact, the Democratic Party is culpable in the cover-up here. More than this is a criminal offence, in my view, although it probably doesn't count as a federal case. But this is the leadership of the free world at stake, and you're allowing a person who is grotesquely and obviously incompetent for the job.
It's a fraud, isn't it? A fraud on the American public, and it matters to Sun readers, and it matters to my viewers and listeners at GB News, because the leader of America is the leader of the free world, and if there isn't somebody compos mentis in post in the White House, it's a problem for all of us.
It is. It's a matter for every person who is in what we describe as the free world, the democratic Western alliance. And I think that you know, now to go from a man who is clearly incapable to a woman who is clearly not competent, I think this is an appalling indictment of the United States in action. And I'm not saying that as a fan of Donald Trump either. I think this is the choice between the two men is, again, an astonishing situation that you would find yourself in the 21st century international politics.
Of course, you had a very long and successful collaboration with the media entrepreneur, media proprietor Rupert Murdoch, who is US-based. What would he make of this debacle, this pantomime that is US politics?
I haven't spoken to him, but I think he'd be as shocked as anybody by this. I mean, after all, he's 93 and fully compos mentis, and
is he still an honorary chairman of one of the largest media companies in the world?
Well, he is, and he runs it. Well, he doesn't run it as much as he did. He's stepped back a bit. But, I mean, he knows exactly what is going on in his company, which is a giant organisation still to this day. And I think he would be appalled by the spectacle. And I think that he would already have been appalled by the sight of Joe Biden looking so doddery and inarticulate in his approach to interviews.
Now, we've got a statement for from Sakir Starmer, so stay with us, Trevor Kavanagh, if you can. That is the former political editor of The Sun newspaper, former political columnist as well, Trevor Kavanagh. Sakir Starmer has tweeted the following on the social media platform X. He has said, "I respect President Biden's decision, and I look forward to us working together during the remainder of his presidency. I know that, as he has done throughout his remarkable career, President Biden will have made his decision based on what he believes is in the best interests of the American people. Now, Trevor, I want your reaction to what the Prime Minister, I was nearly going to say Leader of the Opposition, but he is now Prime Minister. It's been about two weeks and a couple of days that he's been in post. Sir Keir Starmer is our new Prime Minister. Your reaction to those words, it sounds to me like the political establishment on the left are circling the wagons here.
Well, I think that, to be fair to Keir Starmer in this, and I'm not always ready to be fair to Keir Starmer, he has no alternative but to put the best possible gloss on the departure of the President of the United States, whoever that incumbent may be. So that is what you'd expect from them. But I think that if he were honest, and I'm sure he would be if asked, he would also reflect on Biden's reputation as president over the 4 years in office. And we've seen the hasty retreat from Afghanistan. We've seen economic policies which are inflationary, which are increasing mass immigration, and which are building up huge levels of debt, which are going to have to be paid one day. And all of these are heading for a forecast by the experts of an economic crash sometime down the road. So, I mean, he hasn't been a great success as president. Not when you get underneath the skin of it. Yes, the economy is booming, but at a huge price.
Indeed. Trevor, stay with us. I'm delighted that we've got Trevor in the studio. He is the former political editor of The Sun newspaper. But let's get back to the United States now. Let's speak to a man who knows Joe Biden very well, former White House correspondent and close friend of Joe Biden, John Christopher Boer. JCB, good to see you again. Your reaction to this news? Your friend, Joe Biden, has exited the race for the White House in November.
It's great to be with you, Mark, but just understand something. There's nothing formal about my working at the White House. I am there practically every day. I still have my hard pass, and I get to see Joe Biden in person. Unlike your guests, who are amazingly trashing this man as if he's an old, doddering fool, he is a terrific president. He did the right thing, and as President Kennedy said, he passed the torch to a new generation of Americans born in this century. And Joe Biden did the honorable thing, is a noble man, and what's really scary, last guest, he's terrified of the power, and especially Gorka. They're terrified of Kamala Harris because they know she's a very, very successful Attorney General of the largest state in the United States with a great record. And she's a firebrand, she's ready to go, and she's not a fool, as much as you'd like to make her out to be one. She's very bright, very intelligent, and she's got the women behind her, and she's got women of color and people who are young, a younger generation. Joe Biden knew this, and she will probably be the next nominee for President of the United States, which is the convention in August. That's on the 19th.
Well, this country has a recent history of left-wing lawyers getting the top job in Sir Keir Starmer. Perhaps Kamala Harris will achieve the same thing in November if she gets to be on the ticket. But if Joe Biden is not well enough to run in November, why is he well enough to be president today?
That's preposterous. He's well enough. I'll send you every medical report, one that came out two hours ago. You people, and I adore you, you know, I consider you a friend, but your talking point coming from the Trump campaign, we're talking about, I know Donald Trump for 60 years. He's never been well. He's never made an honest statement in his life. He sues people. He goes after people. He's a convicted rapist. He's been convicted of many, many felonies, and he does not deserve to be president of the United States, although his disciples who worship him, deify him, have drunk the Kool-Aid, and I'm afraid your previous guest has had a little bit of that Kool-Aid himself.
John Christopher Boer, I'm thinking of sending you a television. I don't know whether you saw the TV presidential debate. That was the beginning of the end for your friend Joe Biden, wasn't it?
Of course I did. It was awful. We did not like it. It made me ill. But he came around. He did another speech the next day. He spoke to the NATO folks. He did a piece with the NAACP. He was vital. He was powerful. And I think he will certainly make it until Election Day, until January 20th, 2025, when the next president of the United States, whether it's Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer or whomever, all governors, by the way, very, very powerful governors, will be sworn in on the steps of the Capitol, and there will be no January 6th riot that was inspired by Donald Trump.
John Christopher Buer, are you not willing to accept the very noticeable and obvious cognitive decline of Joe Biden that we've seen for, at the very least, the last 12 months and probably the last 4 years?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Look at this footage now. There he is, like a statue at a music concert, with a nasty case of rigor mortis, like a statue.
You know, I don't understand your motivation. I know you're going after this guy.
Look at the footage, JCB. The eyes don't lie.
I'm watching everything.
It's like send Grandpa home early. He needs an early night.
He pulled himself out of the race. What more do you want? He's not leaving the White House. He has plenty to do, and he will continue to do it to finish his term with a very, very strong ending. And I think we should give him that kind of respect, as your prime minister has.
Now, John Christopher Buer, I understand your loyalty to Joe Biden. You are a loyal guy, and you're always welcome on this show. But let me ask you about the alternative to Joe Biden. You mentioned Kamala Harris. Will there not be a temptation within the Democratic Party to find a more popular and stronger candidate?
Well, first of all, whether you like to ridicule her, I know you don't, Mark, but your guests like ridiculing her, trying to make her into a fool. She is very competent, and she is very liked. In fact, there are alternatives, and we won't really know till the convention in August. I believe it's in Chicago. That if she is the choice of the delegates, we'll choose her. She needs to get those delegates, and we had a very difficult time. I lived through it. I've been in politics since John F. Kennedy, who I volunteered for as a young lad. And I remember in 1968, we had Lyndon Johnson, who from the Oval Office, and Joe Biden will be in the Oval Office this week, saying, I will not accept and I will not take the nomination of my party. And he decided he wasn't going to run. What happened? It was a very difficult year. You don't remember that. You're too young, but I'm sure you read because you're a smart man. In 1968, my candidate, the one I volunteered for, Robert F. Kennedy, not Jr., the original Bobby Kennedy, he was assassinated. Okay? He was assassinated in Los Angeles. He did not get to Chicago. Lyndon Johnson pulled out. And unfortunately, we had Hubert Humphrey, who was really a Johnson guy. He was for staying in the war. The youth didn't like it. And guess what? Richard Nixon became president of the United States. So it's a very vital time for America and for Great Britain, for all of us to come together with clear eyes and understand what we're up against in this world and how we need to defeat President of the head of Russia, Vladimir Putin, who is basically the best friend of Trump, and they want to get out of Ukraine.
Okay.
And I think this is what's going to happen. We're going to have a strong president if we have Kamala Harris or Newsom or Whitmer, or there's a list goes on. There are plenty of very, very vital Democrats, and they're all governors, by the way, because they are executives of their state, which is a thing.
John Christopher, just a couple of seconds if you can. I'm just online now, and I've got the latest polling for Kamala Harris, the vice president, and someone who has, in just the last few minutes, thrown her hat in the ring for the race to the White House in November. A survey of 1,500 registered voters conducted between July the 13th and 16th of this month by YouGov for The Economist found that 51% disapproved of her performance. She has a current net approval rating of -12. It's not exactly a ringing endorsement, is it?
Well, let's see what happens over the next couple of weeks. And I think polls are a sketch, a momentary shot, and let's see what happens. But I think, if she's who this president is supporting, and I believe he is, and I believe that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton are supporting her as well, then the Democratic Party will get behind her, and you will see a surge of youth. And I think the one who should be terrified today is Donald Trump, because he knows, as we say in gangster movies here in America, the jig is up.
There you go. Well, the jig will never be up for the brilliant White House correspondent, John Christopher Boer. JCB will catch you soon. Always a treat and always an education. He's nothing if not consistent, let me tell you. Let's now go elsewhere in the United States. Greg, are we off to New York City? We're off to Los Angeles, California. And the woman who actually came out early to diagnose Joe Biden as suffering from cognitive decline and indeed creeping dementia. Now, we don't have that as a fact. That is not a medical diagnosis that can be stood up or confirmed. But that was a judgment made by the woman known as America's psychiatrist, Dr. Carol Lieberman. Carol, good to see you again. First of all, your reaction to this news?
Well, I mean, in a way, it's not surprising. I mean, it was just kind of, we were waiting for when that was going to finally happen. But I'm glad it did. And, you know, but I will say that other than disagreeing with your previous guest, I think that the time between now and January, the inauguration of the new president, which hopefully will be Trump, that this is going to be a very dangerous period because the whole world knows. And finally, Joe Biden, it seems, and the Democratic Party has admitted that he's not fit to serve. I mean, that's basically what his letter and all that, you know, said, that he doesn't want to, he wants to do what's best for America. So this is a really critical time. It's just like when he surrendered in Afghanistan, when the whole world realized just how bad he was, how bad his cognition was. So it's a dangerous period for us. I mean, there isn't really any. I mean, I guess the only other alternative would be for the 25th Amendment or something like that, and have Kamala Harris start early. But that's not. I mean, that's a horrendous choice as well.
Indeed, there are plenty of floating voters in America who do not like Donald Trump, but were going to vote for him because the alternative was Joe Biden, somebody they imagined to have or perceived to have cognitive decline. Donald Trump doesn't have that ace card up his sleeve anymore. So is the departure of Biden a problem for Team Trump?
Well, I guess it depends on who they do finally put up on the ticket. I mean, and I don't think it's as big a problem as it would have been before the assassination attempt, because that has won over a lot of people who would have voted for Biden or anybody else other than Trump.
How do you think the Democratic Party are going to respond to this crisis? Because let's be honest, it is a crisis.
I think there are a lot of different people wanting different things, you know, wanting other people to substitute, you know, people in favor. There are all these names being thrown out, like Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, Gavin Newsom, of course, Governor Whitmer. You know, so it's going to be interesting to see whether they gel into a consensus for one person to replace Joe Biden on the ticket.
Indeed. I mean, are they a collegiate bunch, the Democrats? At first glance, they don't seem to be.
No, I don't think so. But this is, you know, this is a crisis, so maybe they will come together in this crisis.
Carol, if there's time, we'll catch up later. Thank you so much for joining us. America's psychiatrist and a woman that actually petitioned for Dr. Jill Biden to be essentially held to account for spousal abuse for encouraging her husband to remain president. Carol will catch up shortly. Before we go back to the former political editor of The Sun newspaper, Trevor Kavanagh, let's hear from my top pundits. We have Chloe Dobbs, Paul Richards and Theo Usherwood. Theo, will the Democratic Party now come together in the spirit of self-preservation?
It's the question that we're all asking ourselves, isn't it? Of course, if there is an advantage for just going with Kamala Harris because it can be done quickly, she can be installed as the new top name on the ticket, and it's just a simple question of then who does she appoint as her VP running mate. But as Paul was just mentioning when we last spoke, there is a danger that if you install somebody without actually putting them to some sort of test or contest, then there's always a danger that actually we'll discover that she's not very good when it comes to political campaigning. Paul mentioned Gordon Brown. We can think of Theresa May. She, of course, was named Conservative leader. It was a coronation back in 2016. By the time it came around to the 2017 election, she fell to bits at the hands of Jeremy Corbyn. And there's a danger that if they go short and decide that actually it's Kamala Harris who should lead the Democrats, then she'll come up against Donald Trump and she'll be steamrolled. And I think if you look at Barack Obama's statement this evening, he talks about wanting an open contest or entering uncharted water. And there is a merit to actually putting this contest before Democrat delegates to decide who should be the leader, kick the tires on the likes, whether it's Michelle Obama or Pete Buttigieg, to actually see who has the minerals to go up against Donald Trump and make this some sort of contest, because right now it looks like a poison chalice for whoever takes over, given the current polling and the strength of Mr. Trump.
Well, indeed. Chloe Dobbs, do you think the Democrats should spend a bit of time finding the right replacement for Joe Biden, or do they rubber stamp Kamala Harris?
I'm not sure, because even if it goes to a contest, I'm not sure they've got any good viable candidates. We've heard rumours going around about Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and apparently he's a bit more popular. But, I mean, look what he's done to California. Fentanyl crisis, the place is falling apart, and we've just seen Elon Musk choose to pull X and SpaceX out of California because he's just introduced another woke gender policy law saying schools are not allowed to forbid teachers from telling, the schools are not allowed to make their teachers tell parents if children change their gender or their sexual orientation. So it is going to be as woke as ever, whoever we get. Now, benefits to them just going straight away with Kamala Harris and not having a contest is funding. One of the reasons why it took them so long to decide to get rid of Joe Biden was concerns about funding, because you had donors freezing their funding for Joe Biden, saying he needs to go, we need someone better. But if they hold off on choosing another candidate, they're going to be worried about them not having enough time to bring in enough donations for whoever the candidate is.
Indeed. Paul, this new Labour government would have hoped and would have dreamed of some kind of creative and ideological partnership with a Democrat-led White House. All of that looks in tatters now, doesn't it?
There's an enormous amount of affection for Joe Biden in the Labour Party, and there's also admiration for some of his policies. Trevor Kavanagh was dismissing the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, but I mean, people like Rachel Reeves have looked at that big state intervention, a green agenda, but also one that creates jobs and helps businesses, and wondered whether you could do something similar here. So there is a lot of affection personally, but also politically, with that bit of the Democrat Party. Obviously, you know, the Labour government has to work with whoever is in government anywhere, particularly with our major ally, the United States. So they're going to have to work with whoever it may be, even if it is Donald Trump. The thing that's just slightly missing tonight, though, is it is a bit sad for Joe Biden. I mean, this is a human story, too. He obviously wanted to carry on, and he's going to feel somewhat betrayed now, I suspect, because he isn't going to be allowed to go forward for that second term. And I think that bit of the story seems to have been missed so far.
Indeed. Well, my top pundits return in the next hour. And don't forget, there is a Take at 10 on the way. Hot off the press, my verdict on 4 years of Joe Biden on the evening that he withdraws from the race for the White House in November. Final thoughts now from the former political editor of The Sun newspaper. He was at The Sun from, I think, 1978 until 2024.
Indeed.
A journalistic career spanning 6 decades.
It is, yes. It's been an amazing ride, I have to tell you.
Most definitely. And here we are. The world was certainly in a tumultuous place when you went into those Sun offices in 78. We were just, well, you probably, the first winter was the winter of discontent, wasn't it? Which paved the way for Margaret Thatcher's landslide in 1979.
Yes.
So there was chaos in the world then. Mid-70s, the UK came close to bankruptcy and having to go to the IMF with a begging bowl. What do you make of the Western world in 2024 by comparison?
Well, it depends. In 1978, of course, it was the winter of discontent, and I just arrived back from Australia, which was a nice, peaceful country where things worked and there wasn't rubbish piled in the streets, etc. So it was a bit of a shock for me and my family. In the next 4 or 5 years, with Margaret Thatcher in command, things changed dramatically and remained dramatically changed until the Labour government of Tony Blair began to meddle with some of the things that made the clock mechanism work properly. And we're paying the price of that, not least of all in mass immigration today.
And major constitutional change.
Major
the power of Crown goes.
And the derogation of power to the Welsh and Scottish assemblies. And of course, the Tories came in and made it even worse. I must say that it's very difficult to forgive the Tories for the debacle of the last 4 years, particularly. So I'm not singing their praises, but I think that we are in particularly dangerous waters now because of the story we're talking about tonight. And I think that Carol Lieberman hit the nail on the head when she said that we will be spending the next 4 months waiting for something to happen, the next shoe to drop, about who's going to be leading the Democratic Party into the next election. Clearly, Joe Biden isn't going to be president in anything but name over the next months. And I think that, in fact, for the last 3 or 4 years, most of the work that the administration has been doing has been done by some very good officials, not by Joe Biden. And the world will be watching, as Carol Lieberman said. China and Russia and Iran and North Korea will all be weighing up what's going on here and seeing the weakness of a president who didn't resign with a dignified withdrawal, as John Christopher suggested. He's had to be dragged kicking and screaming out of the Oval Office against the wishes of his wife, Jill, by such as Barack Obama, and by Nancy Pelosi. I mean, these are formidable figures within the Democratic Party. And when they are obliged to come in and basically boot out an incumbent president, then things are in a very, very serious state.
Whoever the Democrats find to run against Trump, does he remain the lesser of two evils for America and the world?
The two evils being?
Well, being either Trump or Harris, or Trump Newsom, Trump Whitmer, you name it.
Well, I think the suggestion that Kamala Harris is suddenly going to come good is very unlikely. If she is going to be the next president, then she's got to step up in the months to come. If she is nominated more or less immediately and, as you say, simply named as the new incumbent to be, then she's got to start performing. And if she doesn't perform, or put it another way, if she starts to perform as she has so far in public when under pressure, then heaven help us, people will swarm to the Trump camp.
Briefly, Trevor, it's still Trump's to lose, isn't it?
Yes, and I don't think he will. I don't think they can pick another candidate in the time available who is either known nationally, certainly not internationally. None of the runners and riders, including Kamala Harris, is known outside the United States.
Most definitely. Trevor, you have retired, but can we coax you into the GB News studio from time to time?
Yes, of course.
There you go. I've got it on record. There you go. We'll be quoting that back to you. Trevor Kavanagh. He is the former political editor of The Sun newspaper and former political columnist as well. And let me tell you, I'm going to miss Trevor's weekly columns, from which I stole outrageously, because you won't find a more coherent and articulate political commentator in the country. My thanks to you, Trevor Kavanagh. Well, lots more to come if you're just joining us. It is official, folks. Joe Biden is out of the race for the White House. He will not be participating in the final hustings in November, in what is a truly remarkable political development. So, lots more to come in what's going to be a busy hour. This is Mark Dolan tonight on another historic day for America and the world. Just a week after the attempted assassination of presidential hopeful Donald Trump, dramatic video footage of which we brought you on this show, the current incumbent of the White House, President Joe Biden, about whom there have been profound health concerns for a long period of time now, has pulled out of the presidential race in November. So, in this hour, who replaces him? Is this a political gift for Donald Trump? Does it guarantee him the keys to the White House this autumn? Or, if the Democrats can find the right candidate, is this the political banana skin which keeps the orange one out of office for the next 4 years? Over the course of the next 60 minutes, we'll speak to Republican Party insiders, Democrats and political commentators on both sides of the pond. And I want to hear your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. It's been a busy hour. We've not had a chance for feedback yet, but it's coming. And we've completely torn up the running order of the show tonight. We were going to talk about the Labour Party and the economy and Suella Braverman. Who's she? All eyes are on the US now, and I'll bring you every twist and turn in what promises to be an evening of high political drama. And as always, yes, right, as always, you will get a Take at 10 in 2 minutes' time. Tonight, hot off the press, my verdict on Joe Biden's 4 years in office. An embarrassing and catastrophic chapter of American history, hopefully never to be repeated. Biden's out, but who's in? Find out after the news headlines and Tatiana Sanchez.
Mark, thank you very much. The top stories, a recap of that breaking news. President Joe Biden has announced he's standing down from the US presidential race, saying it's in the interest of his party and in the interest of the country. It comes 4 months before Americans go to the polls, pending the race for the White House. He posted a statement on X this evening, saying it's been the greatest honour of my life to serve as president. It follows weeks of intense pressure from fellow Democrats after a faltering debate performance against Republican Donald Trump at the end of June. Biden will continue as president for the remainder of his term. He's backed his Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place as the Democratic Party's nominee. Spokeswoman for Republicans Overseas UK, Sarah Elliott, said the election race will be a divisive one.
This is also another reason why Joe Biden didn't step down earlier, because Kamala Harris was not a very popular alternative to him. So it will be a fascinating but very divisive election campaign going forward. But they're going to have to switch gears. Trump right now is leading in all the swing states, almost beyond the margin of error. But those polls mean nothing now because it's a new person at the head of the ticket.
Meanwhile, former US President Donald Trump, who's standing for the Republican Party, has responded to the news, writing on his Truth Social platform. He said Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve and never was. He also said, "We will suffer greatly because of his presidency, but we will remedy the damage he's done very quickly." The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has paid tribute to President Joe Biden, saying he will have made his decision to withdraw based on what he believes is in the best interests of the American people. Tory leader Rishi Sunak praised Joe Biden's love for America and dedication to service. The former Prime Minister said, "Our partnership has led to significant achievements and I wish him all the best." Meanwhile, in other news, Rachel Reeves has suggested that pay rises could be on the way for public sector workers. Independent review bodies are reportedly set to recommend pay rises of 5.5% for teachers and for NHS staff. But schools and hospitals are unlikely to be able to meet the above-inflation boost with their existing budgets. The Chancellor says a final decision will be made soon and insists the sums in her budget will add up. And normal levels of GP services at GP surgeries will take some time to come back. That's after Friday's global IT outage. The British Medical Association warns GPs need time to catch up on lost work over the weekend after the tech glitch knocked a computer system used by doctors offline. The outage was caused by a faulty security update that was deployed to around 8.5 million Windows devices. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
What a profound insult to our intelligence that it's suddenly a big story that Joe Biden is in cognitive decline. The usual suspects who covered up his health issues and effectively gaslit Americans, pretending there's nothing to see here, are now heaping praise on a man, to be clear, was never fit to be US president. Don't give me a good general, give me a lucky general. That's the old military adage. And Joe Biden got very lucky when the pandemic hit in 2020. It meant that he could hide in his Delaware mansion and not campaign in that runoff against Donald Trump. Trump, of course, campaigned relentlessly, whilst Basement Joe, as he became known, was able to hide from the American public and therefore hide what any fool could see was profound cognitive decline. Anyone with eyes and ears has known that this man was in no position to have access to the nuclear codes, to be at the helm of the biggest economy in history, and to lead the free world. So this decision to withdraw from the November contest is 4 years too late, and it's too little too late. The credibility of the Democratic Party, who knew he wasn't right when they offered him up for election in 2020, and who lied to America and the free world about his ability to do the job over 4 years, is now torn to shreds. How can you believe a word the Democratic Party say, or take seriously their recommendation of any new candidate? They could offer up a scarecrow, and they'd promise you he's not made of straw. And don't get me started on Barack Obama, who tweeted the day after that disastrous presidential debate, which proved to be Biden's downfall. Obama tweeted, "Hey, we all have tough debate nights." It wasn't a tough debate night. Joe Biden's brain wasn't working. Lies, lies, and more lies. Anyone who thinks that Biden has been running the country for the last few years is clearly as divorced from reality as Biden himself. But whatever the extent of his input when not taking a nap or watching reruns of The Golden Girls has been an utter disaster. On his watch, there was the catastrophic and botched withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan, handing a mineral-rich country and billions of dollars worth of US weapons to the wretched band of gangsters known as the Taliban. Biden's disastrous COVID response, which saw needless lockdowns, brought a once great economic superpower to its knees, not to mention mask and vaccine tyranny. Remember when Joe Biden said that if you get vaccinated, you won't get COVID? More lies. His administration has printed hundreds of billions of dollars, leading to eye-watering inflation. And America is now so badly in debt, it makes Katie Price look financially solvent. In the last 4 years, China have grown militarily and economically, with designs on Taiwan. And is it any wonder that Vladimir Putin decided to try it on with Ukraine 2 years ago, given that the confused Joe Biden was the incumbent at the White House? Under Biden, America has descended into catastrophic wokery, with kids at primary school told that they're born in the wrong body or racist because of their skin colour. And just this week, legislation drafted in California by Biden loyalist Gavin Newsom makes it law for kids to be able to change gender at school without parents knowing. That's law now in California. Divisive and highly contested critical race theory has torn apart a once successful melting pot society with the disastrous influence of BLM, a corrupt organisation to which Biden took the knee. And then there is the southern border. 3.5 million people entered America illegally last year. You heard me right. 3.5 million people entered America illegally last year. If you don't think that is an economic and national security disaster for the United States, then I can't help you. Shame on the Democratic Party for letting Joe Biden take the job in the first place, and for the cruelty of keeping this poor man in office when it was patently clear and obvious to all that it was neither in the country's best interest or his own. Now, I was joined last night by America's best-known psychiatrist, Dr. Carol Lieberman. We just heard from her a moment ago. She actually reported his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, for spousal abuse, for encouraging him to remain president. Strong words, perhaps, but would you encourage your partner to do a job for which they were clearly not physically or mentally able? Just weeks ago, top media commentators were saying that Joe Biden has never been sharper. He's at the top of his game. He's whip sharp. Is it any wonder why public trust in establishment media is at an all-time low? We knew all along that Joe Biden wasn't right, that he wasn't able to do the job, and we were gaslit and lied to. What's that line from George Orwell? The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. Getting rid of Joe Biden is now simply the shifting of deck chairs on the Titanic for the Democratic Party. It's going down. Love Donald Trump or hate him, he is now sitting pretty for a return to the White House. A sclerotic economy, a botched foreign policy, acquiescence to woke ideology, and a gaping open border have paved the way for Trump 2.0. The establishment tried to impeach Donald Trump. They tried to bankrupt him. They tried to lock him up. But right now, Donald Trump is looking at 4 years in the White House, not the jailhouse. And now, tonight, news that disastrous Deputy Kamala Harris may well replace Biden in the race. That certainly means that Mrs. Trump should start measuring up for curtains in the Oval Office as we speak. The dishonest Democratic Party only have themselves to blame. Joe Biden was a bad president for America and a bad president for the world. This is a shameful chapter. Let's hope it's never repeated. OK, let's get reaction now from tonight's top pundits. Political commentator Chloe Dobbs, former Labour parliamentary candidate and special advisor Paul Richards, and former political editor of LBC, Theo Usherwood. Theo, where do the Democrats go from here?
Well, they've got to pick a new candidate quickly, and it's looking like it's going to be Kamala Harris. But, of course, whilst she's already come out and said that she would like that nomination to pick up the baton from Joe Biden, it remains to be seen whether she's going to be able to do so without a contest. Of course, the danger of going long and trying to actually have allowing others like Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer to come into the contest, potentially even Michelle Obama, is that the Democrats are seen to be fighting amongst themselves, squabbling that they cannot decide who they actually want to lead the country. And whilst that happens, Donald Trump will be able to take full advantage and portray the Democrats as being obsessed with their own internal arguments and navel-gazing rather than focused on the needs of America going forward after this election. So it remains to be seen exactly which direction they're going to go in terms of picking their next candidate. But if they decide to have a contest, if they decide not to anoint Kamala Harris, then there is a danger that only plays into the hands of Mr. Trump.
Paul Richards, the Democratic Party's great mistake happened in 2020 when they put Joe Biden forward to be president, wasn't it?
There are nights, Mark, when I agree with your takes at 10, but this is not one of them. I didn't agree with a single word that you uttered there. I think Joe Biden has been a very good president. I think he's taken his decision in the best interests of his country. And I don't believe the next election in America is a done deal. I thought one person that should be worried about tonight's news is Donald Trump, because he's going to be the old guy in the election now. They're going to pick somebody younger than him for sure. All of his attack lines against Biden are now blunted, of course, and his campaign is stymied. So I think the election is now thrown open. I don't believe that it is a done deal at all. The most important question now for the Democrats is to choose the best person to defeat Trump. That should be the only overriding question they need to address over these next few weeks. Whether it's Kamala Harris, whether it's another candidate, an open process to achieve that is what they must focus on now, because Trump would be a disaster for America and the world.
Chloe Dobbs, Paul Richards there, very clear that Joe Biden has been a good president. Would you agree? What is his legacy after 4 years in the White House?
Well, I mean, you just told us, Mark, that it's 3.5 million people illegally entering the US, which has been absolutely devastating communities in states on the border like Texas. For example, I mean, we think 45,000 people in a year coming across on dinghies is wreaking havoc here. Think what it is causing in America. And where things have gone well in the Biden administration, is that because of Biden? No. I mean, it was clear as day that he is not the one running the show. He's just the figurehead that we see on TV at the front. He is not doing any of the work. And even if things are going well, I think that that's extremely undemocratic for us to not actually know who is running the country.
Fascinating stuff. Well, look, I'm delighted to have Paul Richards, Theo Usherwood and Chloe Dobbs with me for the rest of the hour. In the studio is our national reporter, Charlie Peters. Charlie, you've got some developments.
Well, last night it was all speed ahead for the Biden campaign. This morning, his campaign manager said there was no chance this man would drop out at 1:45 local time in D.C. He told his close team that he would, and moments later, that public statement came. And since then, there's been a lot of change. The Biden campaign committee has officially renamed to Harris for President. Kamala Harris said, "My intention is to earn and win this nomination." But in the last hour, the chair of the Democratic National Committee has not mentioned Kamala Harris in his response to Biden's decision to end his re-election campaign. He said that the American people will hear from the Democratic Party on next steps and the path forward for the nomination process. This coronation hasn't been secured just yet. She's got 24, maybe 14 hours ready to consolidate this moment now to prevent it becoming an open process. The Washington Post, a liberal paper that's aligned with Biden so much in recent times, its editorial board has said tonight that they need an open convention in August to select a new ticket. And many of the Democrats that you'd expect to rush and rally to surround Kamala Harris in the moment have not done so. Some of those people who Kamala Harris and the Biden campaign would want to hear from, maybe they're plotting their own plans to run in this convention.
Charlie Peters, stay with us because we've got lots more guests to speak to on this issue. If you are just joining us, Joe Biden has sensationally withdrawn from the race for the White House in November. I've got a statement. Before we go to somebody that knows Donald Trump well, I've got a statement from an individual some would consider to be the president-elect already. Of course, 8 days from a failed assassination attempt, Donald Trump is alive and kicking. And on Truth Social, the social media website and platform that he owns, he has tweeted the following. Here's what Donald Trump had to say. "Crooked Joe Biden is the worst president by far in the history of our nation." Has he been listening to my take at 10, I wonder? He goes on to say he's done everything possible to destroy our country, from our southern border to energy dominance, national security, international standing, and so much more. He was annihilated in an earth-shattering debate, and now the corrupt and radical Democrats are throwing him overboard. He was not fit to serve from the very beginning, but the people around him lied to America about his complete and total mental, physical, and cognitive demise. Whoever the left puts up now will just be more of the same. He signs off with his well-known political moniker, "Make America Great Again." Back to Charlie Peters before we go to Roger Giewald, because, Charlie, you've got some more for us.
Yeah, a breaking line here. A senior Democrat, Peter Welch, he's from Vermont. He said that he's not ready to stand in and support Kamala Harris. That's a report coming out from CBS News in the United States just in the last moment or so. He's a key name here because during the start of that serious discussion that reached really a crescendo last week in Washington, calling for Biden to stand down, he was one of the names that came out and actually said, come on, he's got to go. He was one of that sort of 35 or so House Democrats making that statement. But the reports are suggesting now that he's not ready to come out and support Kamala Harris, adding to those calls that some donors and possibly some senior background Democrats are making for this to be an open convention in August.
Well, it's interesting that, the mood music is that the Democratic Party are split on whether to have a coronation of Kamala Harris as the presidential candidate in November. Couple of seconds, if you can, briefly. Is Barack Obama, former president, is he the potential kingmaker in this situation at this moment? Is it you know, his call that will be quite significant in terms of what the party does.
It'll be hugely influential because he's just got rid of the last king. He's been a key part of that move. It was understood that both Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi, the former House Speaker, were involved in organising the donors and the senior Democrats to make that move. An unofficial, unelected Biden.
You think they've engineered this coup against Biden?
Almost certainly. There's been no denial of those very influential, very public reports that Pelosi's been organising people in the background. It's understood that this week she managed to break through that inner circle, the steel ring of advisors that Biden has, and show him the polling that if he stays, they lose.
It's never easy to break through a steel ring, let me tell you. We're going to go to... let me tell you, we're actually going to head to Washington, the USA, and we've got some live shots of what's happening in Washington. And there's Delaware. Now, of course, that is the home of Joe Biden. That's where he'll be spending what we assume to be his retirement. So there you go. You've got two shots. You've got the White House, and that is Washington, D.C., on the right-hand side of your screen if you're watching on GB News, and Delaware, which is the residential home of Joe Biden, who isn't retired yet, of course. He's got 5 months in the top job. How long can he stay in it? Let's ask US political analyst Dr. Roger Giewolb. Roger, good to see you again.
I'm on a television broadcast.
Well, there you go. It's keeping us very busy. Now, Roger, let me get your reaction to the news. Are you in any way surprised that Biden has withdrawn from the race?
No, I actually predicted this a couple of weeks ago that it would happen this weekend. What I didn't anticipate was that it would create an existential crisis. I'll come to that in a moment. One thing I disagree with Donald Trump about is that it's not Joe Biden, it's Barack Obama who is the worst president America has ever had. His ego drove him to make deals to appease the Iranians, which of course results in them having the nuclear capability that they do today. And his ego again, because this is his third term, he's the one pulling Biden's strings. He's the puppet master. His desire to extend this to a fourth term kept this Biden, who was completely unfit for purpose, as you've just said so eloquently, from day one in office, and caused this mess and the existential problem I'm referring to, which is this. I have been on many outlets this afternoon and this evening, and I haven't heard a single contributor or host or presenter mention the problem that we have, which is that we have a senile old man running America, being the leader of the free world from now until January. It's unthinkable. I never imagined when I predicted he would stand down that he would not stand down from both roles, as a nominee for president, potentially, and as president now, and let Kamala Harris take over at least for an interim period.
What do you think is the likelihood that Biden will be forced from office before November, Roger?
I think it's very likely, because I think the problem is the Democrats have created such a disaster. I mean, it's a bad Hollywood script. You couldn't make this up. The situation into which they've put the country, and they just can't swallow it all at once, Mark. They are announcing its damage limitation, but soon they are going to have to come out and stand him down as president, however they do it, because, you know, I can't believe that nobody has mentioned, not a single political statement, no presenter, no contributor, no correspondent has pointed this out. How can this guy run America and the free world from summer until January? It's insane. So, yes, I think that he will be not put down, he will be brought down. He will have to resign. He'll be made to resign somehow.
Roger, we'll catch up shortly. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Roger Giewolb. I'm delighted now to welcome leading US political commentator Hillary Fordwich. Hillary, thank you so much for joining us. How is this news going down stateside?
Well, I have to say, obviously, just like you've mentioned, and by the way, your monologue, I thought everything you said was totally accurate. And I'm not just saying that to be nice, but everything you said was accurate. How is it? What's happening in the United States right now? The biggest issues are that we're going to be going into, for her, Kamala Harris, she's going into a money primary and she's going into a power primary, unofficially, of course, because the primaries are over, because she has to raise an immense amount of money. Right before I came on air, I believe she'd already raised about $9 million. What she needs is the endorsement of all the big players. Interestingly, notice Obama has endorsed her. Obama is already hedging his bets, and obviously we know that he's plays the strings behind here, and he has already said that he will put his faith in the party and that the party will come up with the best candidate. I think that's going to be the huge issue. So most of the issues in the United States right now are around those two things for her: who would be the running mate, and will the Democratic Party even coalesce behind her? As you've seen, a number of them have come out for her in support. What I will say is what you were just talking about, though, also is with regard to the lack of competency of who we have in the White House right now. And obviously the Speaker Johnson has come out and has said that he should step down. I think you're going to see exactly the same amount of lawmakers come out. There were about 35 had come out to ask Biden and tell him that he should step down. I predict what's going to happen, Mark, is you're going to see those similar lawmakers on the other side, Republican lawmakers in particular, and you're going to see a huge groundswell for him to resign the presidency. And last but not least, remember, Kamala doesn't have any delegates. They were all Biden delegates. Now they only have 106 days until the election in November and less than a month until the Democratic convention in Chicago that starts on August 19th. All of this has to be done, and the only precedent in history was when LBJ stood down, but he stood down in March in 1968. Not that much time we have, as I said, 106 days and less than a month to the convention.
Now, fair play to you, Hillary Fordwich. You have been predicting that this would happen for days now, that Biden would be forced to exit the race in November. If he's forced from office before then, are we looking at days, weeks or months, do you think?
Very soon. I think it's going to be very soon. And you know why? Because he needs to save his reputation. What does he care about? Don't forget, he spent his entire life in Washington, or basically since Nixon was in power. He has been in Washington. His political career is at stake here. His legacy is at stake. And it is sad, actually, that he let, and I would call them political courtiers, all his staff and his inner circle, that he let them put him up for the debate. He should never have done that debate. He sank himself. Now, was that his decision? Was that their decision? But his legacy is at what is at stake for him. That is the issue right now, legacy.
Legacy, indeed. And what about Trump's team now? How do they react to this political curveball? Clearly, Kamala Harris is an attractive candidate to be opposing because she's got negative poll ratings as we speak. But what is Donald Trump's next move, do you think?
You're absolutely correct. She has negative poll ratings. She has never ranked highly at all. And in fact, she had to drop out of the race when she was actually running, and she didn't have even 2% of the electorate. So she doesn't really have a groundswell, not a populist groundswell. I would say, to answer your question with regard to Trump, I don't think it is a done deal. Why? Because the sands are going to shift so much now. Don't forget now, he is indeed the older candidate. What the Republicans must do now is stay really, really steady and on message. Let the Democrats fight amongst themselves. As you know, Machiavelli would have said, divide and conquer. What I would say is let them divide themselves and conquer themselves. Trump right now needs to just stick on message and really just be pointing to all the failures of the Biden-Harris White House. Either she was involved and she led, or she didn't. That is the question.
Hillary, you know the Democratic Party well. They have an instinct for self-preservation, not unlike the British Conservatives. They're pretty ruthless. No man or woman is bigger than the party. It's all about staying in power. Will they unite around a candidate like Kamala Harris, or are they going to be fighting like rats in a sack?
Well, that's what they have to do. They have to, if they have any chance at all, it is to unite. They have to unite. They know that they have to unite. But it's very interesting to see Obama on the sidelines and not come in endorsing Kamala. What I will say is look at what they did actually, obviously, to Kennedy, RFK Jr. They wouldn't even let him be on the ballot. So it's a new Democratic Party. And don't forget also, she's a DEI candidate. That is very tough. The Black Caucus and the Hispanic Caucus has already come out in support of her. That's why, Mark, it's very difficult to oust her. But yes, the answer is they have to coalesce around whichever candidate it is, and they know that. They know they cannot divide and conquer themselves.
How much reputational damage is the Democratic Party going to suffer from what is effectively a political pantomime?
Well, it's a political pantomime, and it's been a lie. This is the sad thing is, anybody who's far left, just like the far right, they're never ever going to switch sides. What we're talking about always, Mark, with every election are the independents, the undecided. That's who you're talking about. And actually, I will say something like 73% of them are women under 30. So the question is, what do those women under 30 believe? What are they seeing before their eyes? All the conspiracy theories, everybody that said that Biden wasn't competent, Biden wasn't capable. Don't forget, the mainstream media hid that from the American electorate.
Okay.
That's why the debate was such a surprise and a shock to them. So my prediction is this is going to be shocking to them. And just like the amount of Democrats I've heard say, never Trumpers, who have actually now said they'll vote for Trump, I think you're going to see, as long as Trump stays calm, stays on message, and just keeps pointing to the failures of the Biden-Harris White House.
Hillary Fordwich, always a welcome contributor to the show, political and royal expert Hillary Fordwich. Now, Donald Trump's brand new, freshly announced running mate, J.D. Vance, has been on Twitter. He's tweeted on X the following message: Joe Biden has been the worst president in my lifetime, and Kamala Harris has been right there with him every step of the way. You can see the attack lines coming in early on that one. Over the last 4 years, he goes on, she co-signed Biden's open border and green scam policies that drove up the cost of housing and groceries. She owns all of these failures, and she lied for nearly 4 years about Biden's mental capacity, saddling the nation with a president who can't do the job. He goes on to say, President Trump and I are ready to save America, whoever is at the top of the Democratic ticket. Bring it on, are his final 3 words. Well, joining me now is Professor Azim Ibrahim, who is a research professor at US Army War College and director at New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy in Washington, D.C. Professor Ibrahim, thank you so much for joining us. Are you surprised? Well, he's joined us and now he's gone. That's right. We've all a bit of the rainbow flag there. But listen, folks, this is a massive political bombshell if you're just joining us. Joe Biden is out of the race in November. But the million-dollar question is, can he cling on to power? If he's not fit enough to run in November, why is he fit enough to have the nuclear codes and lead the free world right now? I'm delighted to say we've got the line back to Professor Ibrahim. Professor Ibrahim, good to have you back. Your reaction to this political bombshell?
Well, Mark, one thing I think you've missed is that Joe Biden does get credit for the stepping down from the nomination, because there was simply no mechanism by which he could have been forced out of this. This is been done completely voluntarily. The debates usually have no effect on the election outcome. The most important factors for election outcome are usually name recognition, incumbency, and track record. And Joe Biden did have all of those things. Irrespective of what you may think of them, those are hugely advantageous. Now, where I disagree with J.D. Vance when he says that Kamala Harris was with Joe Biden every step of the way, the reality is Kamala Harris wasn't with him. She's been largely absent. She is still an unknown entity in terms of her track record, and she does not have anywhere near the kind of favourability and name recognition that Joe Biden has. Now, what I suspect we're going to see is a super fast a super fast nomination of the next nominee. We have no idea who that may be. I will be very surprised if they bypass the first Black woman vice president as the potential nominee.
Indeed. And what are the implications of Joe Biden's withdrawal for the outcome in November? What's your best guess, Professor Ibrahim?
Well, it depends how quickly the party could recover from this, how quickly the party can select another candidate, another vice presidential candidate, and consolidate themselves and get back into campaign mode. Now, you have to remember now, the fact is that Donald Trump is now the oldest candidate, and standing next to a younger, more dynamic candidate, the contrast is going to be quite vast. And I was, Mark, in Milwaukee for the entirety of the Republican convention. And I can tell you there are a lot of Republicans, you know, the atmosphere was very unified, very energized, because what's different this time is that Donald Trump, they know, can win this election, unlike the last convention where they just thought that this was an anomaly and Hillary Clinton is going to win. This time they know he can win. But the fact is there are a lot of Republican moderates who are simply very unhappy to have a president that's got a conviction behind him. And so all of these elections are decided by who can get out the base, who can get out the voters. And with the Democrats having a new candidate, that is much more likely. Many people are happy from the Democratic base. Younger voters, female voters, student voters were very unhappy with Biden's track record. But now that they have a new candidate, they are more likely to get out the base, get out their kind of vote. So that is essentially the key decider in US elections.
Azim, a privilege to have you on the show. My thanks to Professor Azim Ibrahim, the research professor at US Army War College. OK, well, now it's time to speak to former Government Minister Anne Widdecombe for a UK political perspective. Anne, thank you so much for joining us a little later than usual on a Sunday night. You'll understand why, of course, if you're just joining us. Joe Biden has withdrawn from the race for the White House in November. Is this a political problem for Donald Trump?
I don't think it's a problem for Donald Trump in quite the same way that I think it does actually give the Democrats a problem. This is a very, very late withdrawal. And if he had done it this time last year, it could have all been handled very smoothly. It's a very late withdrawal. And because he has been so bad in recent weeks, I mean, so very bad that it's actually arrived at this stage, there is the enormous question of whether or not he should carry on until the presidency changes hands. So I think the Democrats have got the larger share of the problem. They've also got to find at speed a new candidate for the next presidential term, and maybe also a new vice president candidate. So they've got a problem. I mean, one of the reasons why Biden has been able to cling on so successfully is that there hasn't been an obvious successor, somebody who outstripped everybody else. And people said, yes, this is the man. There hasn't been that man. And indeed, there wasn't on the Republican side either. It's been Trump almost by default. So there is a big problem there. And I think there's a big problem for American politics as well. Now, how have they ended up with the choice that they ended up with between Trump and Biden? I think they've got to look at their systems, at the huge dependence on money, and all the rest of it.
Most definitely. And as you know, we live in an increasingly dangerous world, and they'll be loving this chaos in Moscow and Beijing.
Yes. I mean, almost the only people who will be rejoicing in this are indeed, Putin and Xi Jinping. And they will be. And it doesn't do the enemies of the West any harm, and it doesn't diminish their own confidence when they look at the West and see it in this sort of state. And it's been in this sort of state for quite a long time. It's been quite obvious that the leader of the Western world was senile for quite a long time. And I think it probably did have some sort of impact or play some sort of part when Putin did decide to invade Ukraine.
And notwithstanding Joe Biden's cognitive health, what's your appraisal of his 4 years in the White House?
Well, of course, it's very difficult not to see it as dominated by, as you put it, his cognitive health. I don't think he has done as much as he should have done for relations with Britain. I think, in fact, he's been quite anti-Britain. We remember how he behaved when he visited Ireland, which would have been scandalous, actually, had he not already by then been generally recognised to be failing mentally. It would have been scandalous. And he's always been anti-British, anti-Brexit, got some rather funny historical view of the Irish problem. So I wouldn't actually rate it that highly. But on the other hand, if he can now go in a dignified way, and that's going to be difficult if he hangs on, if he can go in a dignified way now, well, fair enough, let's move on to a new world.
Indeed, and he bangs on about being Irish. I've looked at his family tree. He's about as Irish as a Toyota Prius, but we'll leave that to one side. What about the Democrats now? There are parallels, aren't there, between what's happening in the United States and the Democratic Party, who need a new leader, and the Conservatives here in the UK. What do you think is the best course of action for the Democrats? They need a good candidate, but the issue is if they have a prolonged beauty contest, they could tear themselves apart.
I don't actually think that the Democrats have got so many beautiful candidates that they're going to have a prolonged beauty contest, quite honestly. I think it will probably end up as a virtual shoe-in for somebody.
Yeah.
And the Conservatives, on the other hand, I think are doing the wise thing by waiting a bit and not rushing into it, as I had thought that they would immediately after the election. They seem content to wait for a short while. Their beauty contest might be a bit more convincing because there are a few candidates who, in their terms, not Reform's terms, but Conservative terms, might be quite reasonable.
And you are a spokesperson for Reform UK. Are you at odds with the leader, Nigel Farage, and his enthusiasm for Donald Trump?
I don't think I'm at odds with him. I mean, my own enthusiasm is a little bit more muted. But on the other hand, Trump is pro-British, he's pro-Brexit. From my perspective, he's pro-life. So, there is a lot to be said for Trump, and he's certainly got guts, and he's demonstrated that guts in recent days. And so, I don't think we're at odds, but maybe our enthusiasm is not exactly equal.
It wouldn't be Sunday night without Anne Widdecombe, and Anne, will catch you in a week's time. My thanks there to former Government Minister Anne Widdecombe. Look how polite she is. I mean, honestly, they don't make them like that anymore. We were going to get Anne on to talk about Strictly, but there's a Strictly crisis happening in the White House. And, of course, now a vacancy in November. What's the latest? Our national reporter, Charlie Peters, is with me. Charlie, what have you got for us?
Sure. Well, in the last few moments, Reuters has said that the Kamala Harris campaign is now urgently phoning up delegates to secure this nomination in August, because she needs 1,969 delegates to be certain that she'll be the Democratic nominee. And at the moment, there's a limited supply of public support from those major Democrats to get her over the line. And we've also heard, haven't we, just from that very strong criticism from J.D. Vance, the Republican Veep nomination. He said all those negative things about Kamala Harris, but she's already starting to decide who might be the Kamala Harris VP. And there are two names I want you to think about now: the Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear and the Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. Because Mr. Shapiro, he was seen in a poll released last week as potentially being able to beat a Trump and Vance pick in that key swing state. You've heard that criticism on your show all night tonight, Mark, that Kamala Harris is a DEI pick. She's only there for diversity credentials. Many people in the Democratic Party clearly think that Kamala Harris needs to pick someone who can appeal to the wider working class, especially the white working class in those swing states, to get a Kamala pick over the line. The Trump selection, by contrast, Trump and Vance, they're appealing to the same group of people. That's what Democratic strategist thinks. So perhaps we will see a Kamala Harris VP nomination coming in the next couple of days.
Charlie Peters is our national reporter. He returns shortly, but now hot off the press, we've got tomorrow's front pages. No guessing what the big story is, splashing on every front page. And we start with The Guardian, and they lead with Biden quits race. US president said pulling out of election is in the best interests of the party. OK, also independent. Biden quits. US president makes shock announcement after resisting calls for weeks to withdraw from the White House race. Daily Mail. America in turmoil, says the paper. Biden out, Kamala in, question mark. The Clintons back Kamala Harris, but Obama fails to give his support. Senior Republicans demand that Biden leaves the White House now. Daily Express, Biden quits, drama in race for the White House. Trump, Biden is worst president in history of the US, is what the Express are reporting. Daily Telegraph now, Biden quits race, Kamala Harris endorsed by the president. Whether or not that's good news or bad news for her remains to be seen as the replacement candidate. Donald Trump demands that he leaves the White House immediately. Just how tenable is his position? And how about this headline? Democrats were reckless and cruel in paving the way to such a disaster. Very much there in the spirit of my Take at 10 monologue at the top of the hour. Daily Mirror now, Biden quits race to stay president. The Eye, Biden quits. US president is forced to stand aside from 2024 White House race to make way for a younger candidate. Metro, Biden bows out. Financial Times, Biden pulls out of White House race and endorses Harris immediately as his successor. And how about this? A bit of much-needed levity from the Daily Star. Biden quits race. Sleepy Joe, it's time for a nap. Prez heading off to bed after endless cock-ups. Their language, not mine. Let's get reaction now from tonight's top pundits for ringside seats and the big political story of the weekend, if not the whole year. Political commentator Chloe Dobbs, former Labour parliamentary candidate and special advisor Paul Richards, and the former political editor of LBC, Theo Usherwood. And Paul Richards, here's the million-dollar question. How long can Biden cling on to power?
Well, until the end of his term. There's no reason at all why he shouldn't see out his term.
Is that appropriate?
I mean, you've already done him in denying him a second term. I think he should at least be able to go with some dignity now.
But this isn't about pleasantries, is it? This is access to the nuclear codes. This is leading the biggest economy in history and leading the free world. It's a big job.
There is no suggestion that he can't deal with some of those major issues. I think the issue was, could he then be a candidate in the frenetic election and then a second term into his 80s.
But were you not perturbed by his performance at the TV debate? Did I not tell you that this man shouldn't be in power?
I don't think those two things are the same. I think I was perturbed by his performance. He had a terrible night, as is widely acknowledged, but that's not the same as saying he can't be in charge of the US, and he can until he's at the end of his term. Entirely reasonable.
OK. Do you think that will wash with ordinary Americans, the idea that a man, Theo Usherwood, who can't run in November, can run the country before then?
It's usually the case in British politics that once you've got your scalp, everybody backs off.
Right.
And they say, look, this is fine. I think in American politics, especially when your opposition is Donald Trump, there are different rules apply. And, of course, Donald Trump is looking to capitalise on tonight's announcement by this demand that he thinks that Joe Biden should go. I just would also just add in at this point that the merits of Joe Biden, because just think why Barack Obama picked him as his running mate in 2008. It was because he appealed to those blue-collar, working-class voters in swing states like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, and he has a billing with those voters, with those blue-collar Americans. And the problem that Democrats have now got, and I think this was always going to be one of the big hesitancies about asking Joe Biden to stand aside, because it was obvious to everybody about his mental acuity and the decline of his mental abilities. But there was a hesitancy, and I think one of the hesitancies was that actually he was the man to beat Trump. He beat him in 2020 because he appealed to those voters, and Kamala Harris doesn't do it. I don't think Governor Gavin Newsom does it. Who are they going to pick who can actually turn up the heat in Donald Trump in those swing states where at the moment the Republicans are 3 or 4 points ahead?
I wonder whether Donald Trump is slightly worried this evening, Chloe Dobbs. He dodged a bullet 8 days ago. I was more or less on air when that happened. We brought video footage of that attempted assassination, and mercifully he survived. But he's got another bullet coming his way, and that is a younger, fitter candidate. Is that a problem?
I think it could be a problem in that although Kamala Harris, if she does end up being the candidate, although she's got her problems and she's deeply unpopular, it may be the case that people like her just because she is not Biden. They were so scared of Biden's incompetency, his mental state, that they think anyone but Biden, and they prefer him to what a lot of people say is, a scary, racist, fascist, orange man. I do not think that, but there are plenty of people who are worried about him. So when Trump has come out and said, it's going to be easy for me now, even easier with Kamala Harris, I think that sounds a bit complacent. That may not be what he's thinking behind the scenes. He may have just said that to sound strong in the media.
Harris has a chance, though, doesn't she, to prove herself and maybe prove her critics wrong?
I mean, she has a chance to prove herself over her campaign period, but you've got to recognise the fact that she has been right next to Joe Biden all the way through. She was given the brief to deal with the southern border, and look what happened with that. So it's hard for her to rinse her hands from everything that has happened over what you have told us is a pretty horrendous term that Joe Biden has been looking over. But we know people that Kamala Harris behind the scenes have been running the show.
Yeah, well, we've had some of the biggest names in journalism on the show this evening. Let's keep with that tradition and welcome the former editor of the Sun newspaper and the founder of TalkSport Radio, Kelvin MacKenzie. Kelvin, thank you so much for joining us at this late hour. Is this a problem for Donald Trump? Joe Biden was the perfect political opponent, wasn't he?
I think Kamala Harris, if she's the one that's chosen, I think that will be a disaster. She's got none of the history, which is a good thing. But remember, within the White House and within the White House press corps, she was the one that was supposed to be stopping the millions of migrants coming across the southern border. And that will be held against her. There's one other aspect, I think, which hasn't been dealt with. My friends and family who live in the States all say that although the outside world view of America is everybody's wealthy, actually the truth about the matter, for ordinary people, actually the money has not trickled down to them. And so there are two issues where I think Trump has a significant advantage over whoever becomes the candidate. I think Kamala will be a disaster, but also the other two who are very prominent. Newsom is so bad that only the other day the Tesla guy lifted up his entire
Elon
business
Musk,
and took it to Austin, Texas. Now that kind of thing in America. There is a lot of battles between states over getting big companies, and states are either growing or they're declining. California has been in decline under Gavin Newsom. So he's toast. He's never going to get it. And the only interesting other aspect is that the governor of Illinois, a guy with a name like J.D. Pritzker, right, who if he became the Democratic candidate, actually is wealthier than Trump, because he got his money through Hyatt Hotels. His father, he was the heir to that fortune. So that would be fantastic if two billionaires were fighting it out for the voters' hand. So look, it's a fantastic moment. I think Kamala will be a disaster. I'm sorry. I'm sure she's a decent person, but actually she has also stayed completely stum, as you might expect her to, over the problems with Biden's abilities.
Kelvin.
Right? Never said a word about under any circumstances. And also the other people who have been disastrous have been the mainstream media. They have been shocking on this issue. No investigations. You never saw The Guardian. You never saw any of the major papers. You never saw the Washington Post. Nobody got into it. And it actually took the New York Times about half an hour ago to start pointing out this guy's not right. Honestly,
No wonder faith in establishment media is now so low. Kelvin, briefly, if you can, couple of seconds. Is Donald Trump the president in November?
I think he is, yes.
Brilliant stuff. Kelvin, we'll catch up soon. Former editor of the Sun newspaper, Kelvin MacKenzie. You're shaking your head, Paul Richards. Does Donald Trump win the next election?
Well, at lunchtime, the answer to that was yes. Now we are at night time, and it's not.
There you go.
It's wide open.
It's all about opinions. Thank you so much to Chloe, Theo, and Paul. I'm back on Friday at 8. Headliners is next.
Warm feeling feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We'll see a mixed bag of weather across the UK during the week ahead, all of us seeing some rain at times, but when the sun pops through, it should feel pleasantly warm. We've seen a ridge of high pressure giving a lot of fine weather through the day on Sunday, but low pressure starting to move back in from the west. That's starting to feed outbreaks of rain in across Northern Ireland, and that will continue to push in across Northern Ireland as we head into the overnight period, reaching parts of southern Scotland and northern England during the early hours, with some showery bursts also working in across parts of Wales and the southwest of England. The southeast should hold on to some clear spells, and we'll also see some clear weather towards the north of the UK, and here we'll see quite chilly temperatures too. We could well see temperatures dip into low single figures in one or two spots, but elsewhere it's